What's up, everyone? Good morning and welcome back to Shaw Locals Bears Insider Podcast. I am Kyle Nabors back here with Sean Hammond and Hub Arkush. The 2023 NFL Draft, guys, is in the books. We got a day to recover. Yesterday on Sunday was nice. Still had to get a couple cups of coffee in me this morning, but here we are, Monday morning. And overall, it feels like just my sense is that Bears fans overall pretty happy with the draft. Hub, now that you've had a bit of time to digest what happened over those 3 days, how are you feeling about it?
Well, I mean, I like that Ryan Poles seems in his second year to be well ahead of where he was last year. I think he's had a clear plan from the start. He got exactly, well, I shouldn't say exactly, but we believe he got exactly what he wanted to do in free agency. And then he came to the draft knowing what else he had to fix. He didn't take a single prospect where I said, whoa, I looked at that guy and I didn't like him, or whoa, that just seems way too high for that guy. On the other hand, he didn't exactly knock us out of the park with any of the picks he made. I mean, there were guys who fit, pretty close, maybe a little better, a little worse to where they were taken. They all looked to be, legit NFL prospects. They definitely took care of a lot of needs. There is the one major question, and I think we've already talked about it. We're going to probably keep talking about it until 5-6 weeks into the season. We see if they finally have a pass rush. But, the fact that they did not take, not only did they not take a pass rusher, a pass rush specialist, an edge rusher, the guys that they took, if you read the scouting reports, you look at the tape, they're all better against the run than they are against the pass on defense. I'm talking about, obviously. And so that's going to be the one thing that we're going to be keeping an eye on until we get into the season and we see how these guys play. But it was the one, surprise, I think, maybe the one thing that people are probably wondering about the most, talking about the most, what the Bears did in this draft.
Sean, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, along those lines, yeah, the Bears took 3 swings at that defensive tackle position. Gervon Dexter, Zach Pickens, and Travis Bell in the 7th round. Yeah, Hub, you're right. I mean, those are interior guys. You're not necessarily looking at them to pile up a bunch of sacks, but hopefully, two out of those 3 guys pan out. I think that would be a good thing. Maybe not all of them are going to work out. You can't really rely on a 7th round pick in there a whole lot, but yeah, the edge rusher is clearly a void. And, Ryan Poles was very clear about it when he talked to us on Saturday. He said, we understand what our weaknesses are and you can't fix everything in one swoop, I believe is the way he phrased it. And yeah, he's right. I mean, if they weren't going to trade up on Friday, which they clearly weren't because they didn't, they weren't going to get one of those pass rushers that we were talking about on Friday, because all those guys went before the Bears picked at 53. And, if that's a fine strategy, if you're going to sit back and you don't want to pay to move up, take the best available guy, and they got a defensive tackle and a cornerback out of that. And I think Ryan Poles can feel okay about that.
Kyle, let me just add the one thing that really intrigues me a little bit. Let's not forget, in free agency, they went out and got a starting left tackle, the first big signing, and then they signed 2 more guys. So now you've drafted 3 defensive tackles, you signed 3 free agents, you've got everybody you had last year. Not everybody that they've signed this winter and spring is going to make the team. And yet you still didn't take a single edge rusher to compete at the position. So it's the quantity as much as the quality at defensive tackle that just kind of pushed me back a little bit. But we have to assume, or we have to hope, that they're doing what I think is the most important thing, which is at every pick in the draft, taking what they thought was the best available player. And they obviously just didn't see an edge rusher when they were picking at 53 and 61 and 64, who they thought were in the same league as the the cornerback and the defensive tackles that they did take.
We saw edge rushers go pretty quickly at the end of the first round and continue into that second round. I thought it became pretty apparent quickly that if they wanted an edge rusher, I guess an edge rusher that I felt comfortable with, they were going to have to move up in that second round. They didn't do that. End up with 2 defensive tackles there, in the span of about 11 picks. I wasn't shocked to see them take a defensive tackle in Gervon Dexter in the second round. I will say, Hub, I was surprised to see them double up at defensive tackle that early in the draft.
Well, to go back and get Zach Pickens, who, I hope he's going to be a great football player. I haven't met the young man yet. We always want to be careful with this because all we have is our own opinions, which are, educated and pretty good. We've talked to as many teams as possible. They've told us what they were willing to tell us. And then we see the quote draft experts. And let's be honest, guys. I mean, we're included in that category too. So I don't want to be critical of anybody else, but most are not experts. Most are guys who love doing this. They're more fans than experts. And so we see all these other lists that we look at. But when all the lists start to match up, and most of them do, you can look at 15 different lists and you're not going to see a lot of radical differences. Every once in a while, you'll see a guy that other people didn't love. But for the most part, these lists tend to look, pretty much the same. And I know from my years of doing this that a lot of it comes from the people who will talk to us, the scouts and GMs that we've talked to, and we know what they think of them. So, we have an idea of who these guys are. Now, there are surprises. Every year, there are great players that come in the middle and late rounds, that nobody had as high. But at the end of the day, you have a pretty good idea of what these lists look like. And to keep taking more defensive tackles and to take Pickens, it just that was the pick of all of them, over the weekend that surprised me the most. And I hope he turns out to be the best player of the bunch. I hope he goes to Pro Bowls. And I'm not saying he won't. I'm not saying he's not a good football player. It's just that, you're rebuilding, you're trying to build an entire roster, and you left your greatest need blank, and so that feels a little funny.
And we shouldn't forget too that the Bears are sitting here with $35 million in cap space still. And so, there's some pass rushers on the market still. There's probably going to be a few that get cut at various points. And we saw that Ryan Poles, we saw last year in the way that he didn't sign Riley Reif until a day or two before training camp. He's willing to be patient and wait this out. And not saying that that's going to be, a long-term solution, but as far as getting somebody in here for next season, there's options.
There are a couple intriguing edge rushers still out there you could get on 1-year deal. I think Yannick Ngakoue is still out there, Jadeveon Clowney. I mean, these are guys that you're probably signing to 1-year deals, but they would certainly improve the pass rush on this team. And I was talking to a friend about that. I can't remember Saturday or Sunday though, was, the one upside, and we know how much of a premier position edge rusher has become. So the Bears, they couldn't get someone in this draft, but let's say things do work out and they continue to move forward with Justin Fields. They got those 2 first-round picks next year. That's one thing where you talk about this being a multi-year rebuild and they can't fix everything in 1 year. As long as, the Justin Fields progression doesn't go haywire this year, they should be in really good shape to be able to find an edge rusher next year.
Yeah, that's absolutely. You just said something that just intrigued me, though. I'm not worried about it going haywire. He has to become a franchise quarterback. This isn't another year where we can, get a little bit of progress and then still feel good about it. Justin Fields has to prove this year that he is your quarterback of the future. And if he doesn't, that's what those 2 first-round picks are for. If he does, great. And he's got the talent to do it. I hope he does. But that's a big if. I don't think that you're going to go into next year still not certain about quarterback and use those 2 other first-round picks on some other positions.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I understated that. I mean, we're certainly not, like I said before, I feel pretty confident in Justin Fields, but I was talking to a friend on Saturday and he was the same way of talking about, Fields, looking really good and stuff. I was like, yeah, I agree. I feel really confident in the way this is going, but I'm going to put this out there. I'm not saying they're the same player. I also felt pretty good about Mitch Trubisky after his first season with Matt Nagy, and thinking that progression was going to continue with good coaching as well. Again, not saying the same thing, hopefully not. But what I'm trying to say is progression is not always, it's not a straight line going up that we expect. So anyway, so really appreciate everyone who is joining us live here this morning for Shaw Locals Bears Insider Podcast. If you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube, you can drop a comment in either of those chats. We will see it. We'll try and get to them. If you have questions as well, if you are on YouTube, we really appreciate it if you hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, hit 3,000 subs over the weekend. I sent that to Sean, I think, on Saturday. I was excited about that. 3K is not a lot, but hey, it's progress, right? Leave a comment as well. We really do appreciate that. And it's awesome to see everyone here. If you're old school and you listen to this in podcast format, we appreciate that as well. You can find that on Apple, on iTunes, Spotify, pretty much anywhere you download podcasts. You can find that nowadays. Guys, So let's get back into it. If you weren't with us on Friday morning, we did do an entire hour-long talk about the first round. We talked plenty about Darnell Wright. Go back on YouTube and give that one a look. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about Wright today. We want to focus on the day 2 and day 3 picks. And so let's talk about those defensive tackles and Gervon Dexter. Let's start there because I guess both of these defensive tackles, there are a lot of athletic traits to like there, but they're both very much projections, Hub. You know, I found it interesting. Ryan Poles on Friday evening talking about like Gervon Dexter, and this is where it gets really hard, right? You look at his production at Florida, and what Ryan Poles basically said was, yeah, he wasn't in the backfield a whole lot, but that was because Florida didn't. You know, they wanted him to read the field and then react. And I guess when you're looking at 3 techniques and guys like that, that's where like maybe the public, the way we view tape and the way scouts view tape is a bit different, if you know what I mean, Hub.
Well, there's no question about it. And I think what you have to realize is that defensive tackles definitely can make your pass rush better. But you don't draft a defensive tackle to get sacks. I mean, you hope they will, and they can, and they do. But when you talk about edge rushers and pass rush, you're not focused on defensive tackles. Now, the Bears have significantly upgraded the defensive tackle position, and that should improve, the pass rush this year. But when you look at Dexter, Gervon Dexter, I mean, he's a guy who played the run very well. But he didn't show a lot of pass rush technique. He didn't show any particular moves. As a matter of fact, one of the things I saw in various scouting reports about him, which I didn't see as much on tape, so don't feel too bad about it. But one of the things I saw is that he didn't have a great first step. And, that's fine for playing the run. You don't necessarily want to be taking too many first steps until you know where the run's going. But if you're going to rush the passer, you better have a good first step. And it's one of the first things you're looking for in anybody you're drafting to improve your pass rush. And it was the one thing on the scouting report and on the tape I watched that troubled me a little bit. Now, the flip side of that, this is a big man and this is a good athlete. And these guys come out of college to play in the NFL and be coached and learn how to play the game at this level. Matt Eberflus has a defense that is Matt Eberflus's defense, is his principle, and the way he lines these guys up. He wants certain guys to fit the style that he plays, and the way he runs his defense is not the most common thing in the NFL. And so the Bears are drafting players to fit Eberflus's defense more than they're looking for, Sean, necessarily somebody who's going to get 15 sacks.
Yeah, no, it's all about the fit. And you're right, Hub. I mean, you look at Dexter, I think you watch the tape and one of the things stands out is that first step is a little slow. But I think where you can see the promise is in his you look at his broad jump results leading up to the draft, and you see that, okay, this guy can really get off. It's just more about, working on that timing of it and working on figuring out how he can do that from the snap as opposed to sort of the way on tape at Florida, you see he's, like you said, he's kind of reacting maybe a beat too late. And I think that's something that they can help him with. And you're right. You look at these defensive tackles, especially him and especially Zach Pickens. And there's, you're optimistic about both of them, but they're going to have a long way to go. And I think a big part of it too is looking at a team like the Eagles with all those guys on that defensive line, and you got to build up depth. And Ryan Poles understands that. And you might have 4 starters on a defensive line, but you're going to have 6, 7 guys in that rotation every game. And so those guys coming off the bench are just as important. And I think it's good that they have like a Justin Jones ahead of them who can sort of show them the ropes in the NFL, and hopefully these guys develop into starters themselves.
The one thing that is really promising in terms of the way the Bears have attacked the interior of their defensive line is not only did they create depth here, but you look back to last year, they were really gashed against the run up the middle. So no doubt they're going to get better with the bodies they brought in there. But as Hub, I think you've made pretty clear, they did not I mean, they didn't draft an edge rusher. One guy that you were really high on that was there on the board when Gervon Dexter was taken, a guy that I like, Tulia. I'm going to butcher the last name here. We were going through this on Friday. The outside linebacker edge rusher from USC, Tula Poti, or however you say it.
Hub was next to me and kept saying he's still on the board. He's still on the board.
And he went on the next pick after Dexter.
Yeah,
that was the part that killed me. I mean, I kept thinking, okay, I'm wrong. They don't know. Yeah, he's first team All-American. He had. I'm just trying to do this from memory, and mine sucks these days. But I think he had 13 sacks last year. I mean, he was the prototypical kind of what you hoped the Bears would get. Now that doesn't mean he's going to be able to do that at the NFL level. That doesn't make him a miss. But the fact that he was there and not just by me, but by so many people highly rated, and that they had already addressed defensive tackle, in free agency, and obviously from their future picks, you saw there were other players they liked. I mean, they liked Pickens enough to take him 4 spots later. So how much of a difference did they have between Pickens and Dexter? And so that was, it was frustrating. But hey, Bijan Robinson went 1 pick ahead of the Bears too, and I'd still love to know what they would have done if he was still there. After everybody told me I was nuts for having him that high. So the draft, you got to be so careful here, folks. The real point is, of the players that the Bears drafted, every one of them, and I think maybe the one that I like the best right now is Tyrique Stevenson. I mean, cornerback wasn't their greatest need, but I think this kid is going to be a really interesting player. And you look at all of these players, if we're talking just Bears, which we are right now, that they've taken, and the question is, how do they project to the NFL? What is their upside? That's more important than what they did at college. I mean, that's why some of these guys in the 4th, 7th, and 8th round, go to Pro Bowls and go to the Hall of Fame. And I think the Bears. Another thing, that Sean and I, we talked to both Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus about this when we visited Saturday night, I guess it was they were just focused on size and athleticism. That was the main thing about this draft for them. And I like that. That I don't have a problem with, because if they're big enough and they're athletic enough, they can be taught. How good is this coaching staff? We really don't know. We've got 1 year with the worst record in the NFL. I'm not trying to be negative about it. I'm just saying it's 1 year, but if this coaching staff, if they've got the right people, and they don't at every position, but if they have some special coaches here, it's really important that you get guys with the ability to become great NFL players. And one thing you have to say about this draft, every one of these guys the Bears took, they appear to have the ability. Do they have the head for it? Can they be taught? That's what we're going to find out.
Somebody pointed out in the comments, and along those same lines, so many of these guys that they drafted were 4- and 5-star recruits out of high school. And, that doesn't mean anything, of course, but, when you look at that, it's like, okay, why is a guy usually a 5-star recruit? It's because he's a crazy athlete. And
Gervon Dexter was focused on basketball until his junior year of high school. He had, I can't remember all the colleges he had basketball offers from. I know Virginia was one of them.
He played with Scotty Barnes. I don't know if that was his high school team or his AAU team. I think it was his AAU team or something. He played some high level basketball, and he, even only playing 2 years of high school football, he was a really, really highly rated recruit. I think he was ranked ahead of Jalen Carter in that class. Both obviously were really, really high. But yeah, you're talking about guys who they have the athletic ability. Now you just have to mold them into that same, into what you see them on the football field. Tyrique Stevenson is another guy, transferred away from Georgia after 2 years because he couldn't get on the field. And
I went back and looked up information on that. He kind of forced his way out of Georgia because they wanted him to play that like hybrid safety linebacker spot for him. And he
wanted to be a true corner, right?
Yeah. He told the coaching staff he wanted to be a corner.
Yeah.
And they were like,
and so what I like, obviously, it's people transfer for a lot of reasons, but I think what you could like about that is the maturity that Tyrique showed. Afterwards, he was telling us about, I probably didn't handle a whole lot of things very well. I would have done XYZ differently. And that's something that Ryan Poles clearly noticed. Ryan Poles brought that up himself. And, he's trying to get mature guys who are high character guys in addition to these freak athletes.
Well, the other thing with Tyreek Stevenson, you talk about high character guys, and you look at the Bears passing on Jalen Carter. And these are not equal offenses. Don't get me wrong here, but Tyreek Stevenson, when he was leaving Georgia, I believe it was when he was leaving Georgia, was arrested for being involved in a bar fight. The Bears, I believe Ryan Poles did address that when asked about that on Friday. Clearly they met with the young man and felt comfortable enough to pull that trigger. But he is a really talented cornerback coming out of Miami. And Hub, when you see the way there's two layers to this. One, you got Jalen Johnson going into the last year of his contract. You don't know if he's going to be here. But two, you needed another cornerback. I guess my question for you, Hub, is how do you see this aligning? Do you see where Stevenson and Johnson are your boundary quarters and you go ahead and kick Gordon inside full time, or do you expect Gordon to still kind of be floating between the two spots?
Well, a couple things here. First, real quick, guys, and yeah, it was 50 years ago, but I got in a couple of bar fights back in the day too. So to me, I never got arrested, fortunately. So yeah, that's not the end of the world.
The difference is like when you say I made a mistake, and that's on me. And as far as we know, Jalen Carter has never said that.
Yeah,
right.
And as far as we know, Stevenson handled it very well, from talking to people and looking into it. But more importantly, the thing that intrigues me the most, Kyle, is I'm not at all convinced that they're not going to make Stevenson a safety, whether he likes it or not. Because what I like so much about Stevenson is that I talked to 3 different scouts, unprogressed, different times, whatever, but they all brought up the same thing. Maybe the best run blocking cornerback in the draft. This kid is tough. He's nasty. He wants to hit you. He's good in coverage. I'm not saying he's not going to be a cornerback, but I think the Bears are deeper, going into this season, or were deeper prior to adding all these new players at corner than they were at safety. And I think that they had to address both positions. And when you get a kid like Stevenson, maybe you didn't address both positions. You just don't know which one he's going to play.
Sean, what do you think of Tyreek Stevenson in terms of his on-field ability?
Yeah, you notice the hits, especially for a cornerback. He hits hard when he's coming up in run support. And you like I like the overall build, everything he's shown. He's got the length that they're kind of looking for, and yeah, like if they wanted to move him to safety, he has the length to do that as well. I don't know that they would need to do that unless Eddie Jackson leaves in a year or two, at least in terms of a starting role. But yeah, there's a lot to like. I think you can feel really good about this secondary right now. If you got Eddie Jackson, Jaquan Brisker, you have Jalen Johnson at corner, and Kyler Gordon and Tyreek Stevenson. That's a pretty good group of 5. If Stevenson is everything we think he's going to be, I think you can feel really good about where the secondary is, at least here in 2023.
Yeah, I like where the secondary is at. Obviously, the Bears spent a lot of resources in the offseason and free agency on linebacker, Hub. We're seeing the beginnings here of a pretty solid defense. Still comes down to how you're going to get to the quarterback, though, right?
Well, yeah, and again, I think I wanted to make the point, but I don't want to overdo it. There's a lot of they did some work on offense too, and made a fascinating pick in the 4th round. So fascinated me. I don't know about everybody else, but
I'm fascinated by both their 4th round picks.
The way they've drafted athletes, does impress me, even though some of these kids were not great college players. Some of them weren't even starters. But at the end of the day, the pass rush will be improved with what they did at defensive tackle. We don't know, with what they have on the edge right now, how much better these guys can get. But I think the thing that we have to keep going back to, and I know I've been beating it up, and I hope people aren't getting fed up with it, is that when you look at the roster that finished the season in 2022, those 45 go 52, whatever you had on, on an injury and whatever else, maybe 10 of them will still be Bears 3 years from now. And so when we start to talk about, well, they don't need this because they got this guy, or they don't need that because they got that guy, they need to get better at every position in the starting lineup and more depth. And as I watched them make these picks this weekend, that's where I think their focus was. Competition. We keep hearing it. Competition. We want more competition. They definitely improved the competition significantly. And now we're going to see which guys win, And so when we talk about some of these guys who are, they're decent, they were better than a 3-14 team, but they're not, we don't understand why they didn't play for the Super Bowl this year. There's nobody, except for Justin Fields, if he can be the guy. There's almost nobody who you can say, yeah, they're going to be here in 3-4 years because that's the guy they want at that position.
A couple comments or questions I'm going to throw up on the screen. Once again, really appreciate everyone who's on Facebook and YouTube dropping into the chat this morning. Rick, regular on the show here, Rick Gonzalez says, do you guys believe the Bears are putting too much emphasis on length on who they draft or either pick up in free agency? I don't ever remember so much talk about length. Hub, what do you think of that?
Well, they talk about it a lot, but the only place where they really focused on it was on the lines and a little, not even so much at cornerback. I mean, 6 foot is a nice size for a corner because there are 5'10", 5'11" guys, but unless you get a 6'2" corner, then you're focused on length. I think we did hear about it a lot. I understand why you're asking the question, but I think their focus on length is very much up front on the offensive and defensive line, and I understand that, and I understand why they would be doing that when you look around the league and look at who the best players are at those positions.
C. Robespierre, I'm going to go with here. Can Hub also comment on a lack of tight end drafted? After the last pre-draft show, I was convinced that depth at tight end was a huge need, Hub.
I thought there were some really good tight ends in this draft, and a lot of them did go. And as a matter of fact, they started going sooner than I thought they would. But once they signed Tanyan, and you've got Cole Kmet, and again, the rebuild isn't over. I know Cole Kmet's contract is up after this year, and there's been a kind of a mixed decision on how good or bad he's been. I happen to like him, and I think that he played, pretty well, and I think that he will be better with better play in the passing game, the quarterback, and they can re-sign him. If he earns that next contract this year, he can be your guy, and then you add Tanyan, and you're in decent shape there. That said, there were some tight ends that I really liked a lot, and especially again, after going with Dexter to come back, 11 picks later and go with Pickens. There was a couple tight ends on the board that I thought were really interesting, and I thought they might go that way. But I don't have a problem with them not doing it. I think they feel as this rebuild goes on that it just wasn't a focal point. They may be looking at Cole Kmet the same way they're looking at Justin Fields. They've got to decide on these contracts. Sean mentioned a little while ago they got $35 million, left in cap space. That's fine. They may spend some of that before we even get to training camp, on new contracts. You just don't know, what they're thinking right now about the guys that they do have.
And I think that tells you also, what they think of Chase Allen and Jake Tonjes, the two other tight ends on the roster behind Cole Kmet and behind Robert Tonyan. I mean, those are two guys that they were priorities last year, and they kept on the practice squad, and maybe they want to see a little bit more out of those two in some game action.
One tight end that I was really intrigued with, and he kept falling down in the third round after the Bears had made their pick with Pickens. I thought maybe he was going to last all the way to that first pick of the fourth round, was Darnell Washington out of Georgia. I really liked that kid. Ended up going to the Steelers about 8 or 9 picks before the end of the third round. And that kind of brings me to a question I want to ask you guys, and then I'll throw that out there to the chat. Where was, Hub, you mentioned Tua, who were Tuli, the kid from USC, who were a couple other names that you guys were watching kind of drop down draft boards that you were going, ooh, I kind of hope that kid sticks or stays there until the Bears get there?
Well, one of my favorite players was a tight end. It was Luke Musgrave, and he went much sooner than I thought he would. And he may have been drafted too high, only because he really didn't play this year. I think he played 2 or 3 games, and you don't know. But probably the biggest surprise was in the first round when Joey Porter Jr. didn't go. I still don't understand what happened there. To me, he was the 3rd best corner in the draft. I think I had him going 12th or 13th. It was the biggest mistake I made in the first round. Not that matters, but watching his tape and looking at the player and knowing what other folks I talked to thought about him, I still don't understand why he lasted as long as he did. And then the other thing that surprised a lot of people, but that I don't know if I predicted it on one of these casts that we do, but I kind of thought that Levis and I forget the other guy, the other quarterback would last into the second round. I
Hooker.
thought they were Hooker. They were just overrated. I mean, they may be good players, they may be fine in the NFL, But they were not surefire first rounders. I mean, Levis threw 23 picks in his last 2 seasons in college. You can't do that at college, at quarterback. And I guarantee you that that's what a lot of those scouts were looking at and saying, well, I don't want to take a chance on that guy. So those are, 3 players that, lasted longer than I think a lot of people expected, that surprised me.
Sean, before you give yours, I'll throw a couple names out there from the chat that I saw come across. John Michael Schmitz, center from Minnesota, taken 1 pick after Stevenson, went to the Bears. Let's see, Charlie Jones, wide receiver out of Purdue, another John Michael Schmidt. Dobbsy checking in down here with my draft crush was Adapolore, the edge rusher out of Northwestern. He fell quite a bit further than some people.
He was the one I was going to mention too. He sort of fit that mold as like, athletic anomaly, but maybe not a guy that you know exactly what he's going to be. But yeah, no, he was totally it for me. And talking to Ryan Poles the other night too, I think he felt that way about Roschon Johnson, the running back they got out of Texas. He was saying that he was surprised that he was on the board when they got him. Certainly an intriguing pick. You get the guy who's been playing behind Bijan Robinson all these years. Everybody talks really highly of him as a person, off the field. And so you add this guy into the mix and, maybe there's something there that he just wasn't able to show because he was stuck behind the All-American.
Guys, the Northwestern edge rusher, and I just don't say names that I can't pronounce.
That's a wise choice there.
It was the same story as Lucas Van Ness, only he wasn't quite the college player. He's a player without a position. He played really well at Northwestern and probably should have been a second-round pick based on his college performance. But when you project him to the NFL, he's too big and not enough of an athlete to be a pure edge rusher. He's not nearly big enough to be playing inside. He's not a true defensive end, even if you don't want an edge rusher. So I think he has a chance to be a good NFL player. But you just didn't know, where to put him, I think was the problem.
I love Triple R, regular to the show. When I asked that question, dropping in with a Sunbelt pass rusher. I like the depth of knowledge there, Triple R. I want to talk Roschon Johnson, but quickly, my guy, I think, Sean, I messaged you on Slack on Friday night, was when Brian Branch was falling down in the second round. I think he ended up going to Detroit at 45. He's a guy that's a safety, but he also could play the nickel spot. I would have been really intrigued with that. I thought that was a great pick for Detroit. But yeah, let's head over to Roschon Johnson because Sean, I think you and I are on board, Hub. I don't know about you as much. Both Sean and I really like Roschon Johnson, Hub.
I understand why. He's a good football player. And when these guys are available, you're going to sit there and focus on it. There's no question about it. My gut tells me that the Bears are probably done in free agency. I just don't think there's a move of that size coming. These guys who, some of them have agents, some of them don't. That's their big mistake if they don't have an agent. But in this particular case, whenever we see guys who are quality players who are hanging out for a while, and you wonder why, it's because they have an unrealistic, vision of what they're going to get paid. I think is the bottom line.
I think you took this somewhere. I was talking about Roschon. Who are you hitting on here? I think we're talking about two different people.
I'm sorry.
We were talking about the Texas running back they drafted.
Oh, I can't get off edge rusher, guys. I'm sorry.
Who's in your mind? Who are you thinking of right now?
Well, let me go to the Texas running back because that I have a really good answer for you on. He's really impressive. He's actually the same size as Bijan Robinson. He's a hair taller, but they're both about 220 pounds. He's an impressive prospect. I liked what Ryan had to say about him Saturday night. Clearly, the Bears thought highly of him. I just struggle with a guy, who was never a starter. This gets back again to the Van Ness thing, although it's a different story. In Johnson's case, I give him a pass because the guy he couldn't beat out was, I think, the best player in the draft, and you can't ignore that. But you don't see enough when these guys aren't starters and don't play that much in college. And so it just felt rich in the fourth round. I when they made the pick, I went back and started looking at everything I was studying and all my notes from all the guys I talked to, and then the other lists, and I didn't see anybody that thought, wow, he could go that high. And so you always take a step back and you wonder about that a little bit. But it goes to what we were talking about before. They were drafting athletes. They were drafting guys with size. And the other thing about this kid is that much like Bijan Robinson, he does it all. He's a good receiver. He's a really good blocker. And he's when you need 2 or 3 yards, he's the guy that you can put right into the hole and that he can turn 1 into 3 or 4 yards. And so, if they think that they're going to be, running back, by situation, if they're going to play all 3 of them, he can be a good fit for some of the things that they're going to have to do this year in short yardage situations.
And his special teams abilities, I think, are going to put him on the roster right away, whether he's playing a lot at running back or not. And yeah, I mean, you look at it was just under 100 touches, which isn't a huge sample size, but he averaged 6 yards per carry last year. I mean, there's potential there. There's a lot to like. And, maybe he wouldn't have reached that average if he were, touching the ball 250 times, but you don't know. I mean, it's worth taking the risk. I don't even think risk is the right word. It's worth seeing that upside and taking a chance on him.
To anyone,
I'm sorry, Kyle, I was just going to say, one of the things that did jump out at me about him, and guys, you can all find tape. It's not that hard if you have a computer. We obviously get more and look for more. And I watched a fair amount of tape Saturday night, trying to figure out what was going on. And the thing that you do notice about him is take a look at his tape and see how many times he knocks down the guy trying to tackle him. I mean, we usually talk a lot about guys who break tackles. He breaks some tackles, but he was more than a tackle breaker. He was a tackler killer. I mean, he ran into people when he had the chance, and he won almost every time. And that's something that people are going to enjoy seeing if it happens, with the Bears.
It's a similar situation a few years ago. They ended up being in a different draft classes, so it's not quite the same. But when we talk about running backs, like Roschon Johnson would have been starting at most places in the country if he wasn't behind a guy like Bijan Robinson. It reminds me a bit of the Saquon Barkley situation where Miles Sanders was behind him. Now, Miles ended up getting a year to himself because he came out the year later. But like Miles Sanders was a blue chip prospect going to Penn State and got stuck behind one of the best running backs of the last decade in college. And I'm not saying that means that Roschon Johnson can be, that level. But what I'm saying is there's a reason he was a Texas running back. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a lot of upside there. And I actually like the fact you look at him being behind that, he's going to be fresh. A guy that was taken later in the draft, like Chase Brown, out of Illinois, love the kid. But Chase Brown, had like 300 and something touches last year?
An insane number of touches.
Yeah. So you talk about a kid that's going to be fresh. Roschon Johnson, that does help some.
Kyle, it was funny. Sean and I, obviously, Saturday, visiting with Ryan and Matt, and not just us, obviously, the members of the media. He was asked that question specifically. Ryan Poles was asked, does the fact that he doesn't have that much, work done, did he not take that many hits in college? Is that a plus? And Ryan said, to be honest, it can be, that he isn't beat up, that he's in better shape. He's got the size, the strength, and the ability. And we saw enough with the smaller, tape size that he had. But the fact that he didn't take the beating, in 2, 3, 4 years in college can be a plus.
All right. So as we move a little deeper here into the Bears picks, guys, anyone left that we haven't discussed about that you want to hit?
Let's touch on Tyler Scott, the Cincinnati wide receiver, speedster.
I would say burner.
Yeah. He's got really good speed. They like his ability to stretch the field. The scout we talked to on Saturday was like, yeah, Justin Fields going to love throwing the deep ball to this guy. Obviously he's not a complete receiver. He's not like a finished product by any means. You're looking at him as maybe a guy who would be your on paper, as you're looking at this right now, he's your 4 or your 5 as far as receivers go. But there's a lot of upside there. You see a guy with that type of speed, and there's possibilities, and maybe he can keep working on his game and develop into somebody who can be a big time contributor.
Guys, I absolutely love his speed, and at that point in the draft, you're looking for guys with maybe one special trait, that is going to put him over the top. Unfortunately, for me anyway, the flip side on Scott, I think I mentioned this when we were talking Friday morning. I love size at wide receiver, and he is small, and little guys, worry me at the next level. Now that doesn't mean there are guys who have had great careers, and his speed could be enough to make up for it. But his lack of size, to me, is a little bit of a concern.
And you know what? Really not that important. But I asked him during our interview session why he likes the Bears so much, and he knew his Bears history. Man, he was just going down the list: Dick Butkus, Mike Singletary, all these guys. He said people think his dad looks like Mike Singletary, like to the point where they get asked that when they're standing in line to get food or whatever. And so he knows the Bears. That's a plus.
Sean, one of the things I noticed is all these guys were checking in on the phone, and maybe it's just me. Tell me if I'm wrong, but most of these guys knew a lot about the Bears. Most of them were really well spoken. Most of them seemed really excited to be a Bear. Now, this was my 46th draft, so I've done this a few times, and I will tell you that I don't remember a group where there were that many guys who were that focused on being Bears, and we knew going in that was something that was important to Poles and Eberflus, and it does appear to be another thing we haven't talked about all that much that they seem to have accomplished.
Especially these defenders, like they know the Bears' history as a defensive organization and a place where there have been some really, really good defenses over the years and really good individual players. And we feel somewhat removed from that now, having just watched them, win 3 games last year, but that still resonates.
Guys, it was interesting. I didn't miss anything, but Saturday I hosted a show. I was co-hosted a show on the Score on the radio, and they were bringing in guests who also are draft analysts and draft experts. And the one thing that several guys said about Tyreek Stevenson is that he was a Bears cornerback. That he played defense the way the Bears want to play defense. Now, I'm not sure if those analysts realize that this is only Matt Eberflus's second season and that he's, bringing in a somewhat different style than what prior coaches have coached. But nonetheless, the point keeps getting made, for good or for bad, the Chicago Bears will probably always be known as a defensive football team.
I saw a comment popping now. I remember Curtis Conway openly hated being drafted by the Bears. So, do you remember that?
I don't know. There's a lot I don't remember these days. I'm sorry for that.
You always, it's not very often, but yeah, every once in a while you get the guy that you can see clearly is not happy to be. They're always happy, like they just got drafted, but yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, I should add, I do remember Curtis Conway, of course, and he was a good guy. He just didn't want to be a Bear. When guys come from, Florida or California or Arizona, they worry about the winter in Chicago. These players do think about these things, and there's a lot of guys who keep looking at the southern half of the country, or for different reasons, or teams that have been contenders in recent years. These are kids. They're in their early 20s. Some of them are still just 20 years old, 21 years old. And they maybe put more importance on some things that in reality in the end game aren't that important.
This doesn't matter all that much, but one thing that I liked about Ryan Poles in the Bears draft was they really targeted, until you got to the 7th round, of which you're kind of lottery tickets at that point anyway. They really seem to target kids from, these power programs. Tennessee, Florida, Miami, South Carolina, Texas, Oregon. There was not a lot of, I'm going to be mean here, Ashland University or Abilene Christian. Like they were taking kids from programs that are playing at a high level on a national stage year in and year out. And I do think there is something to that, Hub.
Yeah, there was only one Kennesaw State, and they went there for another defensive tackle, but beyond that, I agree with you. I noticed that, and particularly as you look the first, 3 picks, Tennessee, Florida, Miami, those are places you want to go. You go back to Texas for a second stringer. They went to Stanford, which is not they don't win as much as well, that's not even fair. Stanford is another pretty good program. And they did seem to focus on that. And again, it is, well, particularly when you talk about the Floridas, and the Tennessees, and the Miamis. I mean, these are schools, these are big time college football programs. And the fact that they have that experience can help them maybe develop a little quicker, moving to the NFL, which is even bigger than any of these big time college programs.
Jay Sanders checking in here. The chat is now talking a lot about potential edge rushers who are still available. I see Leonard Floyd available. Hub, you got a stressed look by Leonard Floyd name popping up there.
Maybe. I mean, if you've got a guy who is accomplished, you can take a chance. And if it is for one or two, but I don't think the Bears are making decisions based on the chance that they might win one more game or two more games this year with a veteran, free agent that they're going to overpay. I think they'd rather look at whatever kids they do have at the position and see if they can develop them before they go in the next year's draft. They made their decision over the weekend. They didn't add any more, young athletes. And so I think they're going to look at what they have. I'm not saying they won't sign another free agent. But to go get a guy who's a 1-year signing who maybe gets you, 6 or 7 sacks, if he can get that many, I don't think that's what they're thinking.
Yeah, Leonard Floyd. If they were to sign a veteran edge rusher, I almost feel like they would care just as much about his role in the locker room, trying to help these young kids develop as his on-field production. And I'm not trying to take a shot at Leonard Floyd there. I just think there would be better options then.
No, I don't know that Leonard Floyd would want to come back even.
Yeah.
And he's had a great career. Nobody's being critical of Leonard Floyd. Yeah. I think that the thing I'm trying to do is answer the question, and I don't know that it really makes any sense for the Bears. I'm not sure how much you accomplish in improving your football team by doing that. There is, guys, I hate this because this is where my memory is still torturing me. There is one pretty good edge rusher who's only 28 years old, and I can't remember who it is. I'll find it before we get done. There may be one guy out there who would be worth taking a look at, who wouldn't cost that much, but the reason he's out there is because he wants more money than he's been offered. So
trying to see if I can quickly pull that up here before we move on. Let's see. Sean, do you have Mark?
Well, the guys I'm seeing right now who are still available on the edge: Leonard Floyd, Jadeveon Clowney, Frank Clark, Yannick Ngakoue, who we mentioned earlier.
Ngakoue was the guy I was thinking about, although Clark's not a bad guy to consider either.
Yeah, Frank Clark, the Michigan guy, isn't he, Hub?
I don't remember, to be honest with you.
I think he's a Michigan guy.
Did Ngakoue? He was on the Colts. Was that with Eberflus? Do you remember, Kyle?
I mean, Eberflus,
or was that?
Was Ngakoue there this year? Was Ngakoue in Indy this year? He's been on a couple different teams now.
Yeah, he's been bouncing around so much. I can't remember.
I just remember when we were still.
Okay, yeah, no, he was only with the Colts for 1 year this past season.
When we were still working on free agency before I even started to spend all my time on the draft, I remember, spending about 20 minutes on Ngakoue. And I think he's been with 4 different teams, and I think he played well with all 4 of them. I think that he has been to 8 or 9 sacks occasionally. And for some reason, nobody kept him. And of course, that worries you a little bit. But he was the one guy I saw out there. I think he was only 28 years old, who is an accomplished pass rusher, and maybe worth considering once you sort out why he's been on 4 different teams.
We're running out of time here, guys. I know, bear with me. I'm pretty sure that's a new handle on the show. Bear with me. Thanks for joining us this morning. He had asked earlier about our thoughts on the NFC North after the draft. How about start with you? How do you think the other teams fared?
Well, I think the Packers probably had a pretty good weekend. I don't think you would call it a complete rebuild, with what the Bears are doing, but they're rebuilding too. Once Rodgers goes, and they weren't a playoff team last year, and they got, in many cases, I thought, the best player available at a position of need, and I think they had a pretty interesting weekend. I thought that the Minnesota Vikings made a fantastic pick, at wide receiver, which is where they were focused, is getting a second wide receiver. And they got a guy who some people think, could be the best wide receiver in this draft. But the team that intrigued me the most all weekend was the Houston Texans, because I keep calling them the Houston Texans. But I don't understand what they were doing.
Detroit Lions.
The Detroit Lions. Yeah. It's it just, they took a running back who probably would have been there in the middle of the second round with the 12th pick in the draft. And then they took a linebacker who I didn't have in my top 6 linebackers, and they took him at what, 16 or 18 or something like that?
18, yeah, Jack Campbell out of Iowa.
Yeah. And I'm not saying he's a bad football player, but the key to this draft is to get quality with the picks that you have. And when you take guys that you might have been able to get 2 or 3 rounds later in the first round, I don't understand what they were doing.
And even Sam Laporta, the tight end that they took the 3rd pick in the second round, it's hard for me to knock taking a tight end from Iowa. It's worked out well for teams, including Detroit with TJ Hawkinson. But there were other tight ends on the board that I liked a lot more than Sam Laporta.
I agree with you, Kyle, but I do know other people who I respect who liked Laporta a lot. He was not, to me, the ridiculous overdrafting that the first 2 picks were. But I do understand what you're saying.
What do we make of their decision to go with Hendon Hooker there in the 3rd round? What do we think about that?
I like that. Yeah, I mean, I think Hooker probably should have gone in the 2nd round, and I think you're getting real value there. I don't think they're convinced that they have their, when I call a guy a franchise quarterback, I'm talking about a guy who's going to take you to a couple Super Bowls, and I don't know that they think that they think that their guy is the guy. Now they played better the second half of the season. They appear to be improving. I'm not saying that they're not set at the position, but I thought Hooker was real value there. And you need to. What happens when your quarterback gets hurt early in the season? And so based on what was on the board at that point, I thought, Hooker was real value.
I thought Jared Goff played better last year than I anticipated in Detroit. I still don't think he's a long-term answer. Mm-hmm. And being able to get someone like Hooker in the 3rd round where he doesn't immediately have to start, you get some upside, see what the kid can do. I think that's a great idea by Detroit. More teams need to be doing that.
You guys, the negative on Hooker was that he's 25 years old, and that he got hurt, and he lost a lot of time. But those are not things. First of all, the fact that he's 25 years old and played college football for 4 or 5 years might make him a faster developer at the next level. And just because a guy has had injury problems to a point, you can't assume that they're going to have him going forward, And so again, when you look at where they got him, I think every team should draft 2 or 3 quarterbacks. Why not? Look what the Bears just added, 6 defensive tackles, but didn't add a quarterback, which position's more important. So I think that was, we're doing another TV show today, our post-draft show. And one of the things that we have to say is who had the worst draft. And I've got Detroit as my team because of those first couple picks, but I do love the Hooker pick.
And now I'm immediately sitting here thinking about who had the worst draft.
Yeah, it's hard. I'll tell you. It's easy to pretend who had the best draft, but now when I've been working on this all weekend. I don't know who had the worst draft. As a matter of fact, I better figure it out because we're taping in 2 hours.
Say the odds that you end up regretting whoever you go with is pretty high too. Mm-hmm. All right, guys. Well, we're gonna go ahead and get out of here in the next few minutes. But Sean, I guess. You're working right now. You've been updating it since the draft ended, the undrafted rookie free agents. It wasn't until last year, I think you had told me Friday, where the Bears released a full list of who they were bringing in undrafted free agents. But any names so far that you've seen reported that stood out to you?
Yeah, you know what? Let me pull that back up again. we won't get the Bears sent out an email this morning. We won't get the official list like Kyle, like you just said, until Thursday or Friday, it's looking like.
And the Bears do have rookie minicamp this
Yeah,
Friday
they
and
have rookie
Saturday.
minicamp this Friday. Hopefully we're going to get to know some of these guys they drafted a little bit, and we'll get to see some of these undrafted guys that they're reportedly bringing in. You know who's an interesting one, and I might butcher this name. I'm not sure quite how he says it. Andre Schmidt. I don't know. Kicker, but he's a local guy. Grew up in Vernon Hills. Kicker out of Syracuse. Kind of interesting that I don't think that they're paying Cairo Santos so much. I got to imagine he's going to be their kicker when we get to the season. But
he did struggle down the stretch.
Yeah. I mean, he struggled on those extra points, and that's a concern. But yeah, you bring in a local kicker. That's kind of curious, kind of interesting, kind of fun. They're reportedly bringing in Tyson Bagent is a quarterback from, I believe it's the Division II school, Shepherd. That's curious. He's a guy who put up some crazy numbers in college, but yeah, wasn't obviously playing at the highest level. Those are two names that kind of stick out to me.
Yeah, the quarterback. Somebody in the media room asked Poles, we heard you're drafting an undrafted free agent quarterback, but they didn't know the name. All I will say is that is probably the one position where I can't find anything to get excited about a Division II quarterback. I mean, if he couldn't find a Division I school that wanted him, or maybe it could be where his dad went, and that's why he went there. I mean, you got to be careful with stuff like this. But I wouldn't get too excited about that one.
All right, guys, let's get out of here, Sean, and then Hub. Sean, we'll start with you. Give us some final thoughts of how this weekend went for the Bears.
Some final thoughts. I think you can feel really good about Darnell Wright and really optimistic about that. And then, you're taking some swings throughout the rest of the draft, and not all these guys are going to pan out, but I think you can be really optimistic about, the type of player that they're bringing in. They're bringing in some really good athletes, and that's half the battle sometimes. Now you got to trust your organization and your coaching staff to get these guys up to speed.
Guys, I wouldn't say that they got the best value, but I feel really good about the fact that they got clearly very solid value with their first 3 picks. I mean, those players, fit in the area where the Bears took them. And the reason that they weren't higher draft picks was really just about production. Well, not with Wright at number 10. That's a pretty high draft pick. So I think that in those 3 players, they may have 3 guys who are starters this year. And when you do that in a draft, that's a pretty good place to start. I can't wait to see, what Roschon Johnson does. I think it's going to be really curious. I was so focused on the guy who we couldn't get in front of that I hadn't paid much attention until they made that pick. And I thought that was interesting. I think Noah Sewell, again, that is, they overdid it at linebacker in free agency, and now you go draft another, linebacker. But I think he's going to make the football team, if nothing else. And I think it'll be curious to see who he develops into. And then having just knocked Division II guys, this Travis Bell kid, I've been thinking about, for 36 hours now. I'm trying to figure out what's going on there, because he doesn't have the special size that they were looking for. He's only 6 foot. He's 310 pounds. But he's a defensive tackle from a small school, and you're in the 7th round, so you're not that concerned about what you do with those picks. But I just can't wait to see him and see what he looks like and see what kind of athlete he is and see what made them find him in the 7th round.
All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up one more time. Thank you, everyone who joined us live this morning, all the comments. It's awesome. Anytime I can't keep up with the amount of comments coming in, I love it. It's always good to know that we're just not talking to ourselves here. Outside of that, make sure you follow us on Twitter at Sean_Hammond, at Hub_Arkush, and at Kyle Nabors. You can also follow our main Twitter account at Bears_Insider. And once again, if you're on Facebook or on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, give us a thumbs up, leave us a comment, tell a friend, drop them a link. We appreciate it. It's been great guiding everyone through the draft and through this pre-draft process. But that doesn't mean we're done. We got a lot to talk about at shawlocal.com. We're going to have post-draft analysis this week. As we were saying, Bears have rookie minicamp, so stick right there at shawlocal.com. Once again, thank you everyone who joined us this morning. For Sean Hammond and Hub Arkush, I am Kyle Nabors. We will talk to you guys later.